Have you ever considered what the world might look like today had Hitler achieved his dream of total conquest of Europe? A chilling thought, isn't it? This dream of his wasn't as far-fetched as you might think. In fact, back in the tumultuous year of 1940, it was a possibility that loomed ominously over the world. Let's rewind to June 1940. The war was raging, and a serious faction within the British government was urging for peace with Germany. Yes, peace with Hitler's regime. Imagine that, Britain, the beacon of freedom and democracy in Europe, contemplating a truce with the very force that threatened to extinguish these ideals. It was a desperate moment, a testament to the dire straits in which the country found itself. Fast forward a few months to September 1940, the Royal Air Force, the RAF, was within a whisker of defeat. The Battle of Britain was in full swing, and the RAF was the only thing standing between Hitler and the British Isles. The prospect of Britain's invasion, once unthinkable, was suddenly very real. The stakes were high, the tension palpable, and the RAF's resilience was being tested like never before. As we moved into October of the same year, another front was in turmoil. Russia, a formidable ally, teetered on the brink of collapse. Panic gripped Moscow as German troops stood a mere 40 miles away. The specter of a German victory was casting its long shadow across Europe, and the world watched with bated breath. These were pivotal moments in our history. A different turn of events at any of these junctures could have drastically changed the course of the war, and consequently, the world as we know it today. Hitler's dream could have been a reality, a nightmare that would have engulfed the globe. With Britain on the brink of defeat, Europe's fate hung in the balance. This was the unthinkable victory, a reality that was alarmingly close to coming to fruition. And this, dear listener, is where our story begins. As 1941 dawned, the situation grew even more dire. The year was marked by a series of events that pushed the world closer to a reality few could bear to imagine: a victorious Adolf Hitler. In the heart of the conflict, Russia found itself teetering dangerously close to collapse. The pressure was immense. Hitler's forces were edging closer, their boots stamping a threatening march just 40 miles away from Moscow. The tension in the air was palpable, a chilling reminder of the potential catastrophe that loomed. The panic that gripped Moscow was not unfounded. It was a city on the brink, a country on the precipice. The Russian government, the people, they were all aware of the stakes. A defeat would not just mean the fall of Russia, but it could also lead to the realization of Hitler's ominous dream: total conquest of Europe. This wasn't just about Russia anymore. The ripple effects of this potential defeat would have been felt far and wide. With Russia out of the equation, Hitler's path to victory would have been virtually unobstructed. His grand plan, his vision of a German-dominated Europe, seemed terrifyingly feasible. Such a victory would have marked a turning point in the history of the world. It would have signified the triumph of a man whose ideologies and methods were steeped in hatred and violence. It would have meant the subjugation of nations, the loss of freedom, and a future under the rule of one of history's most infamous figures. But as we know, history is a fickle friend. It teases with possibilities, it flirts with what could have been, and yet it sticks to its own unpredictable path. In 1941, despite the dire circumstances, despite the panic, and despite the threatening proximity of Hitler's troops, Russia did not collapse. But the question that lingered was, what if it had? With Russia teetering on the edge, Hitler's dream of total conquest seemed within reach. And that, dear listeners, is a thought that sends shivers down the spine. But what would Hitler's victory have looked like? What was his vision for a post-war world? These questions take us to an exploration of Gerhard L. Weinberg's work, Visions of Victory, where he delves into the minds of the major heads of state during World War II. In this fascinating study, Weinberg uncovers the post-war world each leader envisioned, with Franklin D. Roosevelt's vision most closely aligning with the actual post-1945 world order. However, the most chilling vision belonged to Hitler. In his mind, victory was just the beginning of a relentless march towards a global German Reich. Imagine a world where World War II was merely the predecessor to World War III, before, and so on. A world where the thirst for conquest was unquenchable, where peace was merely an interlude between battles. That was Hitler's dream, a never-ending cycle of warfare until the entire globe bowed to the swastika. His initial victory in Europe would have led to the direct annexation of countries he deemed suitably Nordic: Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Even the German-speaking region of Switzerland would have fallen under his rule. His vision saw the brutal general government of Poland extending into the former Soviet Union as far as 70 degrees east longitude, turning more than half of the Russian Empire into a vast pool of expendable slave labor. Japan would have been granted temporary control of the rest of the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, Mussolini would have been allowed lands approximating those of the Roman Empire, but Hitler intended to retain control of France and Great Britain, converting Spain and Portugal into satellite states. His gaze even extended to sub-Saharan Africa, where he planned to restore the colonies Germany had lost after World War I and seize the rest from the defeated European powers. His vision of victory was a chilling imagining of endless war and brutal subjugation. The world stood on the precipice of a nightmare in 1940 and 1941. Europe, as we know it, was on the verge of a catastrophic shift. A faction within the British government was seriously contemplating peace with Germany. The Royal Air Force was a hair's breadth away from defeat, leaving Britain vulnerable to invasion. Meanwhile, Russia was teetering on the brink of collapse, with German troops looming just 40 miles away from Moscow. Had the dice of history rolled differently, Hitler could have achieved his chilling vision of total European conquest. The aftermath of this victory would have seen a relentless march of warfare, with World War III, IV, and so forth, until the entire globe was under German control. The Nordic countries, Switzerland's German-speaking region, and a vast swath of the former Soviet Union would have fallen under direct German annexation. History took a different turn, but the chilling vision of Hitler's victory serves as a stark reminder of what might have been.